Hey everyone, Tankenstein here. In this video, I'll be reviewing the T58. This is a currently 8.3 BR rank 5 premium heavy tank in the US Ground Forces tech tree. The pack that it comes in currently costs $49.99 USD when not on sale, and it comes with both 15 days of premium time and 2,000 golden eagles. With that said, in this review, I'll be going over everything that you need to know about this tank, including its stats, how it plays, I'll give its strengths and weaknesses, I'll give it some scores in several key areas, and then I'll give my final recommendation and if I feel this vehicle is worth purchasing or not. With that said, if you like this kind of video, please consider subscribing as it means a ton to me. But without further ado, let's get into the review. Now to start, I'll place the stat card here on the side of the screen. Important things to note are its reload rate, its power to weight ratio, and its cannon size. Now for how it plays. The T58 is an extremely unique brawler that has an incredibly powerful armament, good armor, and poor mobility. That is to say that due to the 155mm cannon and 2.6 second autoloader, the T58 can go up against almost any vehicle, especially at close range due to the mediocre muzzle velocities of all the shells that it can use, and either one or two shot them in barely any time at all. It's crazy how the T58 can go up against numerous vehicles, potentially block some hits due to its good armor, and then destroy them whilst they are reloading. This sort of thing has happened numerous times while I've played the T58, and goes to show how good of a brawler this vehicle really is. Unfortunately though, the three shell types are Heat, Hesh, and a relatively low penning APCBC shell. This means that if you want the most consistent armor pen, you'll have to use the Heat. The problem with the Heat is that it won't do amazing post-pen damage and will explode if it hits anything on the way to the target, such as a street sign or a fence. The Hesh, in my opinion, is not very usable in most instances, outside of possibly versus light tanks, but you really can't plan for that, so I really just keep these down to about 2 shells in my ammo load at max. The APCBC shell has amazing post-pen damage, as it has about 640 grams of explosive filler equivalent, but only has 199mm of armor pen at max. This means that it's awesome at destroying enemies from the side, but most tanks at this BR will be able to stop these shells for the most part from the front. Essentially, every shell has major pros and cons, making none of them truly good universal shells. Again, at least they're mostly usable, and when combined with the enormous shell sizes and ridiculously good reload rate, they end up being devastatingly powerful. Outside of all of this, and the brawling that the T55 is amazing at, it really doesn't have any other role that it specializes in. It's too slow to base cap and flank outside of coincidentally ending up doing it. The muzzle velocities are too slow to snipe with ease. The tank itself is too big to sneak around and try to ambush the enemy, and the T58 simply doesn't have the tech outside of its autoloader to help minimize these deficiencies to at least be semi-capable of performing other roles. In short, the lack of mobility and poor muzzle velocity pigeonhole the T58 into the brawling and frontlining role, and that's only because these two roles oftentimes have substantial overlap. Any other role in the T58 is either too slow or just doesn't have the tech, such as the laser rangefinder, to make longer range engagements easy. It does though have a standard rangefinder, which is certainly better than nothing, but it's unfortunately not as accurate and as quick to adjust as a laser rangefinder, making it somewhat difficult to use with such low muzzle velocities at longer ranges. Still, even with these shortcomings, the armament is top notch at its current BR, and the armor is good enough where it can allow the T58 to survive some shots without much damage, if any at all. Also, if I have not mentioned it, the turret, being of oscillating design, is full of strange and unusual angles, which, when combined with its surprisingly good frontal thickness, have a good chance to bounce or shatter many shells coming towards it. Now with all that said, let's get into its strengths and weaknesses, and first for its strengths. This vehicle has an absolutely amazing reload, so long as you still have ammo in your ready rack. 2.6 seconds is incredible for any BR, especially considering the absolutely monstrous 155mm ammo that this cannon uses. Second, it has fairly great armor from the front, especially versus older ammo, such as AP and APHE shells. For its third strength, it has excellent turret rotation speed of between 25.2 and 36 degrees per second, depending on crew skill. For its fourth strength, it has fairly good cannon elevation angles of between -8 and +12 degrees. Fifth, it features a 10x zoom commander sight. Not only is this excellent zoom for this BR, but commander sights are also very rare at this BR. For its sixth strength, it features pretty good gunner's optics of between 6 and 7.5 times zoom. For its seventh strength, it features a rangefinder. It's not a laser rangefinder, but a normal rangefinder is still not a given and is very useful. Eighth, the cannon is so large that if a shell pens the turret, the breach will act as a partition to somewhat relegate damage to only one side of the turret. Beyond this, it has a top-mounted HMG. For its 10th strength, all ammo types are so powerful due to their size that if they hit and pen the enemy, it'll likely do serious damage or even be a one-shot kill. And finally, the T58 has premium RP and SL bonuses. Now for its weaknesses. First, it only has a 6-round ready rack, and it takes nearly 17 seconds to reload one shell back into it with a full crew, which will effectively be your reload rate until you can replenish your ready rack. This will force you probably to spend a lot of time reloading your ammo at bases. Second, it has poor mobility. The weight of 60 tons while only having 810 horsepower makes this one of the slowest tanks at this BR. Third, the great armor is largely useless versus Heat, HeatFS, APDS, and APFSDS. For its fourth weakness, it has an absolutely huge profile due to the large hull, gigantic turret, and enormous cannon. For its fifth weakness, all ammo options, especially the HESH and APCBC, have low muzzle velocities, and will thus be difficult to use accurately, especially at longer ranges. Sixth, the HESH and Heat shells will explode if they hit anything before the intended target, such as trees, fences, benches, and more. Seventh, aside from just the fact that it likes exploding early, the Heat shell has limited post-pen damage, even considering its massive size. For its eighth weakness, the entire rear of the turret is used for the autoloader mechanism and is thus often filled with ammunition, making it a very easy weak spot to hit. It also has polar armor of just 50 to 90 millimeters. Additionally, the entire floor of this tank, which is also poorly armored, is used entirely for ammo storage, though at least it's fairly flat and is not taking too much space vertically. For its ninth weakness, this vehicle only has a 4-man crew, which is fairly low for a heavy tank, especially of Western design. 10th, it has no smoke grenades or even smoke shells. For its 11th weakness, it has a gigantic vertical aiming drive that is both easy to hit and destroy, leaving the armament on this beast useless in most scenarios. 12th, it lacks a stabilizer. Now this isn't too big of a weakness as it's not necessary at this BR, but they are becoming a bit more common at this BR, especially if this vehicle sees a BR increase. Beyond this, pretty much all shell types are useless versus decent composite armor and or ERA. And finally, it has a low ammo count of just up to 21 shells. Now with all that said, let's get into how I scored this vehicle, and that was a lot of strengths and weaknesses. Now first, for armament, I give it an 8.75 out of 10. The armament of the T58, being its main selling point, is one of the most powerful relative to BR in all of War Thunder. With a huge cannon, an amazing reload rate, powerful ammunition, excellent turret traverse, and much more, it can pretty much wipe out a large portion of an enemy team single-handedly in about 15 seconds before needing to reload the ready rack, which can take, of course, a substantial amount of time as stated before. The only real negatives here are that the ammo types are finicky, as the Heat and HESH will explode when hitting anything at all before your intended target. All ammo types also have between 563 and 826 meters per second on muzzle velocity, which is borderline poor for this BR, if not outright poor. I primarily use the T267 Heat shell as it has the highest armor pen value and the highest muzzle velocity, making it more of a surefire kill, or at least an armor pen, whereas the T29E1 APCBC shell has lower muzzle velocity and only 199 millimeters of armor pen at max. Although it will do far more damage if it pens, this penning is not nearly a given, especially at this BR. Also, the fact that it takes nearly 17 seconds to replace a single shell in the ready rack will mean that you won't be able to have long duration fights very easily, but at least the incredible reload allows for the T58 to largely be able to avoid longer fights at all. Still, the ability to fire 3 or 4 shells in the time that it takes most tanks to be able to fire 1 is absolutely amazing. On a side note, I fear that the BR will increase to 8.7 or even 9.0 BR, which could have a hugely negative impact on the armament of this vehicle due to an increasingly large amount of vehicles fielding ERA or composite armor, which would essentially perfectly counter the ammo that the T58 currently carries. You can still kill those vehicles from the side, but frontal engagements would become much more difficult. I would probably rate the T58 as a 7 out of 10 in armament if this vehicle went to 9.0 BR, and that's being generous. And if it increased to 8.7 BR, I would give it a 7.75 out of 10. But of course, right now at 8.3 BR, easily an 8.75 out of 10, maybe even a 9.0 or higher. Now for mobility, I give it a 2.75 out of 10. While it isn't absolutely the worst ever, the mobility on the T58 is thoroughly poor. It feels slower than its 13.5 horsepower per ton power to weight ratio would imply, largely due to its poor top speed and reverse speed, being just 35 kilometers per hour and 6.8 kilometers per hour respectively. Mix in poor acceleration and you have a vehicle that will be among the slowest in every map match that it's in. It's still just fast enough to be usable, but the lack of mobility will likely make players using the T58 quite frustrated, as it will limit your available tactics substantially. For survivability, I give it a 6.75 out of 10. Survivability on the T58 is difficult to score for a few reasons. First, while it has a very good amount of armor on the front, which will be very difficult for older shells to pen, more advanced shells like Heat and APDS will have no problem slicing right through it. Still, it isn't always going to be facing those more advanced shell types, so its armor will still be somewhat useful. Then you also have to consider that this vehicle has no smoke grenades, no smoke shells, and has a gigantic silhouette, and you have a vehicle that ends up being a gigantic target that screams "shoot me" to all enemies nearby. Also, having a large ammo rack that's only lightly armored doesn't help, nor does the fact that it only has a 4-man crew. Still, you'd be surprised at how much damage this vehicle can take, largely due to its still good armor versus older shell types, and the fact that the interior of the tank, namely the huge cannon breech, is not conducive to allowing large amounts of internal damage going to all parts of the tank. Additionally, there are tons of odd angles on the turret, as it is oscillating after all, which can make it difficult for enemies to find a weak spot. Essentially, while some parts of the survivability are quite poor, others are actually really good, which makes it so difficult to grade. To be honest though, the more I play the T58, the more impressed I am with its survivability, and thus the score increases ever higher. But 6.75 out of 10 feels right. Now overall, I also give it a 6.75 out of 10. The armament on this vehicle is what makes it great. Otherwise, the vehicle overall would be pretty mediocre. The mobility is poor and the survivability is good, but sometimes questionable. If you're the type that only cares about the cannon and nothing else, your view of this vehicle would be stellar. If on the other hand you want a more well-rounded and complete tank, you might have a lower score for it than what I gave it at 6.75 out of 10. In all though, I feel like it is a very capable vehicle, but you just have to mind its poor mobility and stay aware of the shell types carried by the enemies that you face. Also, as I noted before, if the BR is increased, the overall score for this vehicle would decrease. I would estimate that it would be 6.5 out of 10 if the BR were to be increased to 8.7, or a 6.0 out of 10 at best if the BR increases to 9.0. Though honestly, I could see it being much worse than a 6 out of 10 at 9.0 BR, as its armor and mobility will be noticeably worse compared to the competition at that point. Now with all that said, do I recommend the T58 for purchase? Yes, I do, but mainly for the aforementioned people that do not mind a slow tank, especially at this BR where tanks are getting increasingly fast. The cannon and reload rate are essentially top notch at this BR, and if it had more reliable ammo choices, one could argue for it being the best cannon relative to BR in the entire game. Actually, you know what? It might even still be. Even with its ammo options being iffy, given that they explode prematurely on occasion and have mediocre muzzle velocities, they are big enough to one-shot many tanks that they hit. Regardless, this tank is a brawler's dream and puts most other such vehicles to shame. If that's your playstyle and you do not mind the aforementioned weaknesses of this tank, it'll be perfect for you. So yes, I give the T58 my recommendation for purchase for offensive-minded players and a recommendation for everyone else when it's on sale. I also give the T58 my Tankenstein seal of approval. This vehicle is basically an enemy team deleter, which allows it to be one of the most fun vehicles in War Thunder, at least when things are going your way. So that said, thank you all so much for watching. If you don't mind, please let me know what you guys think about the T58 in the comments below, and also the review itself. And if you don't mind, please consider subscribing if you like this kind of video. But either way, thanks again, and I'll see you all on the other side. Take care, everyone.